In Season 2 of the Nested Healing Podcast, From Surviving to Thriving, we will take you with us on our journey to the many nourishing lands of healing. With a new guest for each episode, we will get to embark on each of their healing journeys, with their curiosity being, what challenges did they face, and just how did they manage to come up on the other side? From self-love and acceptance, all the way to dance and movement, we will explore the myriad of healing components shining in each of our guests' stories. How can we relate and apply this to our own lives? How can we brighten our light through a dark tunnel? Stay with us on our beautiful deep dive into healing.
Welcome to the Nested Healing Podcast. My name's Jen. I'll be your host today, and I'm really excited to welcome Chad. Chad, I can't wait to hear about your story. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jen. Appreciate you having me.
I'm curious as we start today, what feels like the best starting place for you? Where would you like to start?
Well, I think it'd be important to set some context about some of the things that I've been through in my life that are a bit unusual, I think, relative to most people. So growing up, I could see pretty well. Today I'm totally blind. Let's just start with that. I'm totally blind, but I could see for roughly 21 years of my life. And my parents noticed when I was 3 years old that I was having problems seeing in dimly lit rooms. I was stumbling over things at night and I couldn't see that well. And so they took me to Duke University Medical Center, where I was diagnosed with an inherited eye condition called retinitis pigmentosa. Now, RP, as it's known for short, is an inherited eye condition that gradually causes the loss of eyesight by deteriorating the rods and cones in the retina. Now, nobody in my family knew that we had this disease. My parents were not symptomatic. My brother was not symptomatic. And so this was essentially the hidden family eye disease that there was no historical record that we had that it existed in the family. But here I was being diagnosed by Duke with a high probability that that's what I had. Now, bear in mind, this was before we had genetic testing, so they couldn't say with 100% certainty that is in fact what I had, but they were reasonably certain that I did. And so they told my parents that they should probably sign me up for a special school for the blind. And instead, my parents, they decided to sign me up for soccer because they wanted me to live as full of a life as I could while I still could. And so at that time, I could still see pretty good during the day. I played sports, I played football, played basketball, played soccer, did a lot of things that little kids do growing up. And I was quickly learning the limitations of my eyesight by bouncing into things. I would learn that there was something there at dusk by running into it because you just don't know what you can't see when you can't see it. And so I would learn the limitations of my eyesight through physical injury. And so I was at the hospital so much that they started questioning both my parents and I in separate rooms as to whether or not they were abusing me. But the simple truth was they were not abusing me. I was just learning what I could not see by bouncing off of it. And so that was physically uncomfortable. And then all that continued and progressed at a relatively flat rate through high school. I played sports, drove a car, all the things. Socially, it was uncomfortable to not be able to drive at night like a lot of my peers, a lot of my friends. They could drive at night and do a lot of the things. I couldn't play football on the team because they had, those games were at night under the lights, and I just couldn't see well enough to track the ball through the lights at night. And so that was disappointing and uncomfortable and socially difficult. And then in college, I was studying to go into the medical field because I wanted to help other people. And that's when my eyesight really went completely out. So at roughly 21 years old, I realized that everything that the doctors had been telling me that could happen for my entire life, essentially since I was 3 years old, was coming to fruition, where I couldn't see to complete a simple reading assignment for my literature class while I was attending the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And that's when everything just really it got very real for me that everything I'd hoped and dreamt of becoming when I was going to grow up wasn't going to happen. We ask kids all the time what they want to be when they grow up, and guess what? None of them say blind. And so I had to really mourn the death of my imagined future self, everything that I wanted to be. And that was really where the big transition hit. And that was obviously emotionally uncomfortable, psychologically uncomfortable. And I had to kind of figure out what I wanted to do next. So I'll pause for that for just a minute and give you a chance to react to that. I could keep going, but I want to give you a chance to weigh in
Yeah.
on that. Anything you want to click down on?
Well, thanks so much, first of all, for sharing about what that was like for you to grow up with that condition, still living a full life, as you said, but finding some differences. And then eventually, what really struck me in what you just shared was having to mourn the idealization of the life that you thought you were going to have at that point.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I can just sort of picture as you're saying that the real gravity of the situation.
It was heavy. It was hard. It was all the things that you would imagine it to be. It was yeah, n none of my friends were dealing with these circumstances. All of my friends were, not disabled, and here I was having to deal with a significantly life-altering disability really in the prime of my life. 21 years old is you're in college and you're trying to figure out what you're going to be and who you want to become, and the adventure of life is really just beginning. And it felt like at that moment in time, my adventure was coming to a screeching halt
Yeah.
because I had dreams of going into the medical field and all the things that I wanted to do, and none of them included going blind. And so I wanted to help other people. But after I went blind, I honestly wasn't even sure how I was going to help myself.
And speaking of help, I'm curious, what kind of support did you find in that time of your life when you're going through that transition and, there wasn't a lot of clarity about what would be next, but there's the mourning, like you mentioned. What support did you find, either internally or externally or interpersonally, that helped you through that time?
Well, not a lot, if I'm being
Mm.
just direct about it. I didn't have a whole lot of support. I mean, my parents supported me by, when I ended up switching my major to business, as an example, because I knew I could no longer complete a lot of the classes for pre-med, anatomy, physiology, all of those things required you to identify parts on a cadaver, and I just had to draw the line. There are some things I'm not willing to feel to pass the class. Parts on a cadaver was sort of that line, so I switched my major to business, flushed nearly 3 years of university work down the drain, and this was in the late 90s, and we didn't have books digitally available. There was none of that, and so my mom, the support that I got from her was incredible. She literally read every single one of my college business books to audio cassette for me, and I started recording the lectures at the university. And so I ended up making straight A's at that point, made straight A's from that point forward after I had to relearn how to learn. I was a visual learner. Obviously, that's not very helpful when you're blind. And so I had to relearn how to learn. And who knew I'd become a better blind student than sighted student? But uh, that was sort of the hard skills, if you will, of learning and consuming information, which is pretty important when you're in college, and figuring out how am I going to survive in this new world, this new dark world that I live in. But in terms of like emotional support, counseling, psychological, there wasn't a whole lot. I got a lot of tough love, which I guess was helpful. It helped me make it through some of the hard times that I needed to get through, but not a lot of coaching or emotional support. And I didn't know anybody in my circumstances, so there was nobody to really lean on in terms of, hey, have you been through this? What do you recommend? I just kind of had to find a way through it. My parents, like I said, did support me with, helping me with resources, made sure that I didn't have to work while I was at university, so I could focus my time on studying and getting my degree, because we all knew that that was going to be the path forward for me, was becoming a knowledge worker, if you will. You know, things that it required eyesight obviously weren't on the table. I don't think, becoming a truck driver or airline pilot was in my future. So we had to figure out a way to become qualified enough to really step into a knowledge worker role. And so they helped me from that aspect, but we didn't know anybody who could offer me the kind of resources and support that I would need from, say, an emotional or psychological standpoint.
What do you think you would have wanted for a support system at that time? Like, I guess what I mean by that question is if you were talking to somebody going through something similar in young adulthood or teenager years in that transitional period, what kind of support would you offer that you didn't know about when you were that age?
Well, I would offer them what got me through it. And I now know what got me through it, which is why I wrote a book and now I speak professionally and coach, as you know, and developed a master class on resilience. And so that's what I teach other people now is the anatomy of resilience. And so I would have not ever been able to imagine back then that I would be a better person because of my blindness and not in spite of it. I would never imagine that I would be happier and more successful after I went blind. The things that I'm able to do today, whether it's professional or athletically or otherwise, I could have never contemplated at that point in time. So I've been very blessed to do things uh, that don't really seem possible, I guess you could say, as a totally blind person, whether it's skiing down a black or double black diamond or competing in a jiu-jitsu tournament or building software that Oracle can't figure out how to do themselves. I could have never imagined that could be possible. And so now what I like to do through speaking and coaching and master classes is empower other people to not feel stuck, to not feel like they have to be victims of their circumstances. And I do that because over the last 10 years or so, I've unpacked what allowed me to bounce back better than before. And so now I talk about it in terms of the building blocks or the anatomy of resilience. And so I have people come up to me all the time after I give a keynote or after I'm on the road or we do a book signing or, whatever the case may be. And I offer people those same insights that would have been really helpful for me back in that day. I didn't have that. I just at that point in time when you're in the eye of the storm and you don't have a blueprint, you're just trying to make it to the end of each day, just one foot in front of the other, and just trying to get a little bit better. And that's all I was doing back then. I can't sit and claim to have any profound wisdom that allowed me to navigate that situation. I think it was a lot of hard work and maybe a little bit of luck and good fortune and blessing. But now I know what allowed me to make it through that and come out of the other side, not only in one piece, but better off than before. So I would offer those insights and that wisdom that I've gleaned over the years to those folks going through that.
Mm, absolutely. Thanks, Chad. Yeah, the keywords I really picked up in there is empower and resilience. And I wonder if you could share a little bit about when you first started to find that resilience in yourself. What did you first notice that connected you with the idea that you have this resilience?
Hmm. I think what the first thing that happened that changed my perspective, started to really shift my perspective, was getting a foundation of gratitude in my life. And so where that really originated was when I went to get my first guide dog. And I go to this school, Leader Dogs for the Blind, and I'm 23 years old. I'm rolling in there. I just kind of flushed 3 years of work down the drain. I don't know what I want to be, really. I'd have no clue. I'm bitter. I'm angry. I'm mad at the world. And I go there to get my guide dog. And you wouldn't know it really on the surface. On the surface, I'm a pretty outgoing guy, pretty affable, but inside, this was just kind of eating at me, and it felt profoundly unfair. None of my friends were dealing with this, and here I was dealt these unfavorable cards that I had to figure out how to deal with. And something really special happened while I was there. I was there for 26 days in Rochester Hills, Michigan. And I'm living with people, some of them had it far worse off than I could have ever imagined. Some people there, they had mental impairments on top of being blind, and they were getting a guide dog. Some people were on dialysis because they had diabetes that had robbed them of their eyesight. And there were these two girls there whom I'll never forget. And these two girls, they're getting a dog and they're deaf and they're blind. And they're getting a dog to be independent. Now, here I am. I'm 23 years old. I had all my hearing, all my mental, and all my kidney function, and I had 20 years of eyesight. I was able to participate fully in all that life has to offer for about 20 years. And I had taken all those other things for granted that these people had never even sniffed. They had no idea. And the living courage displayed by these people, particularly those who couldn't see or hear, just left me feeling really ashamed of my self-pity and my victim mentality. Because I could kind of imagine what it's like. Now bear in mind, I was getting a dog to guide me down busy streets, across streets and through malls and stores and restaurants and all those things. And I was able to hear. I was able to hear horns being blown, conversation. I was able to hear traffic flow and read traffic patterns based on the way that you can hear or not hear parallel or perpendicular traffic. It tells you when to go. And here these two girls were, and they were navigating the very same conditions I was without being able to see or hear. And I put myself in their shoes for just 26 days, and it was very humbling to me. It was very inspiring to me that people can have such tremendous living courage when faced with such extreme circumstances. And here I am whining and complaining because I couldn't see after 23 years. And so it forever changed my perspective on what happiness is. I don't believe that happiness is a feeling. I don't believe that it is an emotion. I believe that happiness is a decision that you make. You either choose to look at things that you have or you don't. You choose to let random circumstances that are outside of your control define your happiness. And so I believe that gratitude is the foundation of happiness. And with that, that conscious approach to being happy, it's not necessarily joy. Joy is an emotion, but happiness, I believe, is more about a perspective that we take in life to focus on the things that we can control, which is how we attach ourselves to circumstances. And so that's why now with our kids at home, every night we have a gratitude session where we all go around sharing three things that we're thankful for that day, because it's not happiness that leads to gratitude. It's gratitude that leads to happiness. And so that was a really profound moment and experience for me, that coming back from getting that first guide dog, Miles, it forever changed how I looked at the world and my circumstances and how I attach myself to circumstances and how I show up in the world. And that really is, the tipping point for me. And then that led to the ability to start looking at other elements of resilience, like the stories we tell ourselves, which I believe, is foundational to resilience. What stories do we choose to tell ourselves about our circumstances? I could sit around for the rest of my life telling myself that I went blind because I've got really bad luck. Or I could choose to tell myself that I went blind because I'm one of the very few people on the planet who has the strength and the toughness to overcome that and use it to help other people. Now, technically, both of those stories can be true. One of those stories, though, frames me up to be a victim. But the second story, the better story, is a Jedi mind trick that transforms my disability into my strength. I went blind because I'm one of the few people who can deal with it. And by telling myself that story, I've reframed my struggle, my blindness into my strength. Now, the reason that I went blind, the meaning I attached to my blindness is because I'm uniquely qualified in terms of my mental strength and mental determination to navigate those circumstances and help other people with them. And so not only does it take a struggle and reframe it into a strength, but it gives me new purpose for navigating my circumstances. And I think it was Nietzsche who said, "He who has the why to live can bear almost anyhow." So it's the meaning we attach to our circumstances. And Viktor Frankl talks a bit about this in Man's Search for Meaning, where he was obviously imprisoned in a Nazi concentration camp in the 1930s and 40s, where he found that the people who made it out of those horrific conditions were the people who were able to find meaning in the suffering. And now he found a branch of psychology known as logotherapy. And so it's really profound when you can find new meaning, particularly when it's in service of other people to navigate the hard things that life throws at us.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing. And I'm really touched by the fact that gratitude being something so foundational in how you were first able to develop resilience, that you now share that with your kids in a ritual and a practice that you do every night. And
Well,
that's beautiful that you're bringing that into how you're parenting.
well, we all, as human beings, naturally take things for granted. We all do. I took eyesight for granted until I could not any longer. And I think we all have simple gifts that we're given every day that we have a tendency to overlook. We just take them for granted. We all take things for granted. We don't want to, but it's human nature. And so that's why I like bringing conscious attention to those things, because my hope is through my life I've found, and hopefully it transfers to them, by acknowledging consciously the things that we all take for granted. Hopefully it makes its way down into the subconscious, into the muscle memory of our day-to-day reality, where we can all appreciate the gifts that we're given every day that many of us just overlook or take for granted.
Absolutely. And also about the two different stories that can both technically be true, but choosing the story that benefits you, that pushes you forward, that empowers you, that brings you more resilience, um, is so important, and you really got that heavy dose all at once of perspective by, like you said, being there and for those 26 days when you were getting your guide dog and being in a different set of circumstances and seeing other people with different circumstances. But I'm curious, how do you work with that when you're not in those sort of insightful situations? How do you remember to work with that in the day to day when you get into like the routine of life?
Meaning, how do I remember to find gratitude or to tell myself better stories
Yeah, the
about the ch
telling yourself the better stories, sort of that choosing that narrative that helps you move forward. The only reason I ask about the
Mm,
regular times is because I think sometimes we can have a hard time being aware of our stories when we're not in
yeah,
more extreme circumstances. So I'm curious how you
yeah.
found a way to integrate this. Yeah.
Well, I think for me, it's become kind of second nature at this point. But for those listening, if you're looking at a situation, I think it's not a bad practice to write down regularly, to journal in your journaling prompts, to identify, okay, you're facing a hard situation at work or at home or whatever the case may be. And I do some of this through workshops. I take people through these very same steps. What are the facts of the situation? And what are the stories that you've created around the basket of facts? Now, the facts aren't interpretations, it's just the unchangeable reality, the things that you cannot control. But we often create narratives around those facts that keep us trapped. And I think it's helpful to write down, okay, let's do an inventory. Let's look at the facts. All right, what are the current stories? Now, let's really step back and reimagine some alternative possible stories. If you can't change the facts or the circumstances, like blindness, or maybe it's you got passed up for a promotion at work, you can't change that, as an example, or you didn't get into a certain school that you wanted to get into, or something's going on with one of your children, whatever the case may be. What's some alternative possible stories for that? Is it that, hey, maybe there's a better opportunity waiting for me besides this promotion? Maybe I'm meant to be doing something else. Is it that, this may be a blessing in disguise, whatever it might be? Yeah, who would have imagined that for me, blindness would have been this beautiful gift for me disguised in some really ugly wrapping paper? But it is. I'm able to give so much more back to not only my kids and the world because I went blind. Now, if you had told me that when I was in the middle of that change curve at 21 to 23 years old, I would have had a really hard time envisioning that, accepting that, moving through that.
Mm.
But that is the reality now. That is, yeah, I speak in front of 50 to 60,000 people every year. I'll probably do 80 events this year. I get to reach, almost 100,000 people every year in person, not to mention the people who buy my book and all that. I'm able to create so much more positive change in the world because I went blind. Now, that same opportunity is there for you. Whatever you're dealing with, who knows what the right answer is? You think you want X, but maybe you need Y. Maybe the world needs Y. But I think we get so caught up on what we want to be the outcomes in our lives that we stop to really contemplate whether or not we have the full wisdom of what needs to unfold in front of us. And certainly I thought I knew what I wanted when I was in my 20s, but I didn't know what I needed. I didn't know what the world needed. And it's important to take that pause and whatever you're dealing with, whether it is a promotion or whether it is something going on with your kids, and really challenge your own thinking. Have the humility to question yourself and to be curious and to seek a deeper wisdom that may not be on the surface, and try to understand, why might this be going on? What are some alternative possible stories as to why this happened to me? Now, truth be told, when this happened to me, at first I was asking myself, why me? And I sounded like a victim when I said it. I had the tone and the bitterness of a victim when I would say, why me? But over time, I learned to ask the very same question, but I just had to change the tone. Instead of asking the question with the tone of a victim, I needed to have the tone of genuine curiosity, to seek the learning, to seek the wisdom from the situation, because I couldn't change the facts. I couldn't change the blindness. So I had to change the meaning I derived from it. And after I kept asking that question with genuine curiosity, over time, the answers started revealing themselves to me in some very surprising ways. And now I'm able, to do more good because of it. Who knew that I'd be a better person after going blind? And I don't make those statements or those comments lightly. Bear in mind, I have never seen my wife, nor will I ever, more than likely. I've never seen my kids. I probably will never be able to lay my eyes on my children. This is not a statement I make lightly, but this has been a gift to me. And if you were to offer me the opportunity to see again, but with the caveat that I can't help any more people with what I've been through, I couldn't take it. And in some ways, I could argue that I'm able to see my wife and my kids more deeply because I'm not focused on the surface level appearances of how they look. I'm focused on the essence of the individual, the depth of the person, the humanity, and I'm not focused on how they look. And so if I'm able to do that, whatever people are dealing with, are you looking for ways to justify what you wanted, or are you looking for ways to understand why this unfolded in the way that it did so that you can move forward and benefit from whatever happened to you? Because if you can't change what happened, you have to change the outcomes that arise from it.
Hmm. Thanks for sharing that. It's beautiful and is highlighting for me the importance of acceptance too. Like you so fully embrace and accept where you are now that you wouldn't change it, right?
Well, yeah, and a lot of that gets from one of my pillars of resilience. We've talked about choosing your response a little bit and being intentional. We've talked about telling yourself the right stories, and this kind of leads into the third pillar of resilience that I teach, which is visualizing greatness. I had to figure out how to make blind look good. And I know that sounds a little cheeky, but if you can never reimagine how you can make your unfavorable circumstances work for you, how could you ever accept them? How
Mm.
could you ever thrive with those circumstances if you can never reimagine a future that's anchored to the reality of your situation, but inspiring and bold enough to move you to action? And so for me, at first, it was becoming a successful business person and helping other people by serving as a role model as a blind person who was able to succeed despite going blind. But now it's evolved to include all the things that I'm doing today. But it really is about visualizing greatness. How can you make your situation work for you instead of against you? And once you start reimagining a future that's bold enough to inspire you to take action and do the hard work, but anchored to the reality of your circumstances, then you'll start moving towards acceptance as well. Because then all of a sudden, instead of those circumstances being this kind of big, scary, unfavorable thing I didn't want, you can start to reimagine how they can help you instead of just harming you.
Yeah, I wonder, Chad, if we could maybe go back to, say, your mid to late 20s. I'm really curious to see sort of some of the progression of how your healing story unfolded in those incremental ways. You mentioned that being a really pivotal experience when you got Miles in your early 20s. And then I kind of wonder what came next for you personally in sort of that shift of circumstances from victim to visionary.
I think one of the first things that happened once I got Miles is I came back to university, and instead of being the kid that was bumping into people because I couldn't see well and people thought I was drunk or high or whatever, all of a sudden they saw that, I had this great ambassador of my visual disability, and people started treating me differently. And another important thing that's a bit nuanced about that is before I had Miles, I was walking around. I didn't have a cane. I was trying to pretend that I could see okay, and I could still see decent, but not great. And as my eyesight continued to fade, I didn't know what I couldn't see when I couldn't see it. And so I didn't know how progressive my eyesight was, how bad it was, until I would bump into things and see, oh, well, it's dropped to this level now. Oh, no, it's at a new low. Oh, okay, it just keeps getting worse. Well, essentially what I was trying to do in hindsight, now it's obvious to me, I was trying to pretend to be someone I was not. I was trying to pretend as if my eyesight was okay when it was not. I was trying to live in the sighted world when I couldn't see well enough to. And who knew that being totally blind would be easier than being half-sighted? But once I got Miles, it forced me to embrace the very thing I'd been hiding from. It forced me to be unapologetically authentic to who I am. When you walk into a university classroom with a 100-pound German Shepherd, you've got to own it, right? You're not going to be able to hide that German Shepherd when you walk in. Everybody instantly knew that I was dealing with some extraordinary circumstances. And at first, it was very awkward. It was very unusual, but it was great because it forced me to own the thing that I'd been trying to run from my adult life. I was trying to outrun the blindness. I was trying to see well, even though I couldn't. But once I had Miles, there was none of that. That wasn't possible. And so it gave me a new relationship with my blindness. It forced me to be authentic to who I am and not make any apologies about it. And so that was a real gift to me. Life became so much easier and lighter when I was just true to myself and didn't have to pretend that I could see okay, even though I couldn't. And so that it made so many things so much easier because of the lightness that it brought, because of the expectations were different, because I was trying to live in a sighted world when I couldn't see that well, and that creates some weight and some heaviness to be able to carry around all the time, and that takes a toll on you over time.
Hmm. Yeah. Authenticity, what another great theme to bring in here. Being able to fully show up as yourself. Yeah, what a pivotal point. And you're still at university at this point, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So I'm curious, what comes next for you after college?
Well, I got a job offer from a top consulting firm, Anderson Consulting, and moved to Atlanta. And I was living in Knoxville, obviously, my whole life. My family, my friends, my support system were all in Knoxville. I accepted a job in Atlanta with Anderson Consulting, writing code, which I had no experience doing. I remember I was a pre-med major, had just switched to business. I'd just gone blind and got my first guide dog about a year earlier. And I'm moving to Atlanta and I'm taking on this job that has 70% travel requirements. I have to figure out how to write code for enterprise clients. I've got to figure out the bus, the train system. I can't see, I can't drive. I wasn't even sure how I was going to get my groceries. And so my parents and my friends would ask me if I was excited, and I lied to them and told them, yeah, I was excited. And maybe I was excited, but more than that, I was really scared, Jen. I mean, I was terrified. I had no clue how I was going to figure these things out.
Mm.
I wasn't sure how I was going to get my food, get my clothes laundered. I couldn't drive. I had only one free hand to carry my stuff because I have a big 100-pound German Shepherd leading me around everywhere I go. So I've got one free hand. I'm blind, and I've got to figure out how to do all these things. And I just went blind basically a year earlier. But what I kept coming back to, what I refer to now as anytime we have a fear, we have a counter fear. So there's the fear of failing, the fear of not being able to pull all that off. Maybe I can't figure out how to get my groceries. We didn't have any Instacart or any delivery services back then. We didn't have smartphones. I couldn't use a smartphone to tell me where I needed to go. I had to sit by the bus driver and hope he remembered to let me know when it was my stop. But the fear that I kept coming back to is the fear of never knowing what I was possible, what was possible for me. The fear of not reaching my full potential, the fear of failing the people who had supported me along the way, and maybe most importantly, the fear of living a life with regrets. And so, my question to you is whenever you're facing a fear, do you stop to do the future you exercise? The future you exercise is when you ask yourself, what can future you live with? If you make it to the golden years, you're so fortunate and blessed, and you look back on your life, which fear can future you live with? The one that says, well, I failed at some things, I succeeded at others, but I know where my boundaries are and I've lived my fullest life. Or I never know just how wildly successful that I could have been because I didn't try. And that was the fear that scared me the most, was not knowing how successful and happy I could have been if I just had the courage to step through that fear. Because courage, a lot of people think courage is when you don't have fear. Well, courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is stepping through the fear. It's doing something despite the presence of fear, moving to the other side of that fear, because growth is just on the other side of your fear. It's the only way that you can grow is to face your fears. So that was an important lesson for me. And as I stepped into that in Atlanta, trying to learn all those things, that was the thing that kept pushing me through. And it was not easy. Let me tell you, there were some hard moments and a lot of things that I learned, but I knew that it was the next right step for me.
Yeah, inspiring. And as you bring in fear and counter fear and courage, I'm also reminded of the courage you were inspired by from those couple of people that were at that, what did you say that was called again? That 26-day place where you first got your...
That was at Leader Dogs for the Blind in Rochester Hills, Michigan.
Right. Yeah. So the courage comes back around. Now it's your time to be courageous and step into the fear of learning new things in a city without your support system, straight out of college.
Yeah, and I was also inspired by the fact that my mom had read every single college business book to audio for me. When
Mm-hmm.
someone moves beyond their self in service of you, it inspires you.
Yeah.
And it inspired me to not want to let her down, not let my dad down. My dad was supporting us by working, but my mom, there were days that my dad left to go to work and she'd be reading books to tape. He'd come home, she'd still be reading books to tape. She would have no voice. Her voice was raw. She couldn't speak, but she was still reading those books to tape. And when somebody sacrifices like that to try and empower you, it's very inspiring. You don't want to let that person down. So as you look at whatever's going on in your life as a leader, it's one of the things that I take very seriously is how do you meet that person where they are in that moment? Because you might be the person who's needed to inspire somebody else to ignite their full potential. And by moving beyond yourself in service of that individual, you can do that. You can ignite that ambition in somebody so that they don't want to let you down and reach their full potential.
Yeah. And speaking of stepping into that leader role and inspiring others, I'm curious if you could maybe pinpoint an early example. Maybe it was just a tiny moment in your own history, an early example of when you started to feel that internal sense that you could inspire others, that you'd made it through enough of your challenges that you had sort of something to give to others who are going through challenges. Could you pinpoint an example of when you first started to realize that shift?
I would always hear people tell me from time to time that I'd inspire them, but I never really took any of that seriously. I think it was my own self-judgment. of what I accomplished. I think people's standards for me were a lot lower than my own standards for me, if I'm being very blunt about it. People would like, okay, I made it to work, or I did, like little things that I would hear that and I was very dismissive about it. I couldn't accept that because I didn't see myself as inspiring. I'm doing what I have to do to get to where I need to be. But later on in my career, when I started really moving up the corporate ladder and I started to live up to more of my standards for myself, that's when I could start to accept some of those some of those comments. And I was at one point, a bit later on in the story, I'm a senior director over pricing strategy and solutions at a large multi-billion dollar federal IT company. We were selling to the US federal government. It was my job. I was leading pricing strategy and solutions for the company, and my financial decisions created, 45 billion in contracts, a bunch of jobs, best in class margins, and so I had a lot of professional success in my role, and people would tell me that, and I started to be more accepting of it. I think because I was further along in terms of my expectations for myself, what I thought I was capable of, and then I had a moment at Harvard Business School. My company, I brought in all this business for the company, and then they decided, hey, listen, Chad, you've got a story here. What can we do for you? You've done so much for the company. You brought in, all this money for the company. We want to do something for you. And I said, for some crazy reason, send me to Harvard. And for some crazier reason, they agreed to write a six-figure check and send me. And I was there, and I had this feeling that I was going to be elected as our graduating speaker. I don't really know how to explain it other than I just felt a gravitational pull that it was supposed to happen. And so I'm a type A person. I found a professional speaking consultant, i.e., he was a professional speaker, been speaking professionally for over 20 years. Did a cold outreach, ended up flying to Houston, dropped several $1,000s to write a 12-minute talk for something I'd not even been nominated or elected to do as our graduating speaker, but knew that this was a path that I was supposed to take, and went back to Boston, was elected as the graduating speaker for my class at HBS. I was obviously prepared because I'd done the work, and then I saw firsthand how much I could help people. That night I gave a short little 12-minute talk that changed people, but it, more importantly, or just as importantly, it changed me and my relationship to that opportunity. There was a guy I'll never forget. One of my classmates, he comes up to me afterwards, and he's he's hugging me, and he's kind of crying uncontrollably. And I later found out that he had lost his daughter the year before to cancer, and something I had said had helped him in some small way. Now, I'm not normally a real warm and fuzzy person, but when you have a parent crying in your arms because something you said helped them deal with unimaginable loss, it changes you. And it changed me. It inspired me to think differently about my ability to help other people, and showed me the impact that I could have on other people if I were just to put a little bit of effort behind it. And during that time at Harvard, I was also studying under Bill George's leadership. Now, he's the teacher, executive fellow up there for authentic leadership. He's the former chairman and CEO of Medtronic, world's largest medical supply company, and he teaches a true north leadership framework, which, similar to Viktor Frankl's work, which talks about finding suffering the meaning, Bill talks about linking traumas and struggles in your childhood, in your formative years, to something that you could do at a professional or volunteer level, an area where you've got some talent, passion, and some purpose. And by doing that, by finding the intersectionality between what you do, your past struggles, an area that you can professionalize, and an area where you've got that conviction, it turns what you do from being a job into being a reason for being, a mission for being on the planet. And so that's what it did for me. It put me on the path to where that's when I wrote Blind Ambition, the book, right after that. And then obviously that speech that I gave at graduation really solidified things for me. It ignited something deep inside of me where I saw that by helping people with the struggle that I've been through, made going blind worth it in some sort of bizarre way. And so that's when I started building the path, going from just focused on corporate performance to really pivoting to more human performance in support of organizational goals, but helping people unlock their full potential by teaching them the anatomy of resilience so that they could live a happier, more successful life and obviously contribute to company performance at the same time. But it that was really the pivotal moment for me because I'd heard people tell me before that I inspired them and I just never really could accept it. And maybe that was my own insecurities and limitations and feelings about my own potential and how I wasn't living up to it because I just wasn't willing to accept that about myself yet. And it was hard for me to accept someone else's point of view about me because my standards for me were pretty high. But
Mhm.
having received that feedback from the gentleman there that evening in Boston, it changed my entire relationship with the situation and with my ability to help other people.
Absolutely. And your expectations for yourself, as high as they are, um, you've met them at this point, correct?
Mhm. I don't know that I have.
Okay.
I, I think I'm walking that path. Now I don't even know what my expectations are. I don't even know what my goals are because I think I've exceeded a lot of my expectations, but now I'm to the point to where I know that none of us know what we're capable of. Jen, you don't even know what you're capable of. None of us do. And I know that that's factually true because if you had asked me at 23 years old, what do I think what my potential is? I'm not even in the same universe as to where I'm at right now.
Mm-hmm.
See, it's this incremental progress that we make. We think like, oh, I'm going to have this big thing and it's going to move me from X to Y and that's where I want to be. I want to be at Y. That's not really how it works. Really, how it works is when you create actions and habits and measures of accountability to hold yourself accountable to do the small day-to-day things that seem immaterial. I'm just getting 0.1% better.
Mm-hmm.
Well, look, if you just get 1% better at something that you do every week, in 10 years, you'll be over 17,000% better. That's
Wow.
just in 10 years. That's incremental progress. That's compound interest on incremental progress. We can't fathom what we're capable of because it's these small actions done in a deliberate way, incrementally, that stack up to something really profound over time. And at 23, I could have never contemplated I'd be where I'm at. So I don't think any of us know what we're capable of because we just have to do the hard work every day and get just a little bit better. And over time, it adds up to something that's hard to fathom. And as I look back on my life now, there's a lot. I'm 49 years old. Hopefully, I've got a few more years left in the tank. But I don't know what's possible, my expectations for myself. Now I look at it a little bit differently. Instead of looking at what trophy am I going to throw in my trophy case, I look at it as what are the things that I really enjoy doing that bring me meaning and joy that I love to do that are hard, that if I just keep showing up every day and doing the hard work, where will those lead? I don't know where they will lead, but I know it's a lot of fun to try and find out and just find meaning and joy in the process. And nothing's really taught me that better than Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. We don't have to get into too much into BJJ, but for me, it's a great metaphor for life. Just showing up and doing the work and kind of seeing where the process leads and really finding joy in the day to day instead of being fixated on the next trophy that I'm going to put in my trophy case.
Mm. Yeah, and another thing that really strikes me about you, Chad, and all of the things that you challenge yourself to do, and is that it's an investment in your own development, right? Like you're saying, all that incremental progress that compounds over time.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's more than just a trophy in the case. It's how is this getting me closer to my own mission and purpose? How am I being changed by the cumulative impact of all of these actions, right? Whether it's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or the coaching school where you and I met, or
Yeah.
learning to become a public speaker, or Harvard Business School, in so many ways that it isn't the degree or the certificate or the trophy that you get that is the payoff. It's who you're becoming, you living into your potential, right?
That really is it. Yeah, you characterize that beautifully. It really is. And are you living a life that's congruent with who you want to become or who you think you are or the potential that you think you can step into? And it's honoring yourself by doing that. It's honoring yourself by doing the hard work, by creating the habits and living up to your full potential and not for the trophy. I mean, I used to care about trophies. I'm not going to lie. I used to really be fixated on trophies. They're irrelevant. What really is relevant is not the trophy, the public recognition of what I do. It's how I think about myself. And am I honoring myself enough to live up to my potential? Am I honoring myself enough by serving the other people who can learn from what I've learned so that they don't have to go through some of the hard things that I had to go through to figure those things out? And the more I'm on this rock that keeps hurtling around the sun, the more I realize it's a lot less about, the trophies and what people think of me, and it's really more about what I think of myself. And am I being there for other people? Like, am I in service of the people who need to hear me? Because I believe the only reason we're here is to serve other people. It's for love and for caring for other people. And the best way I know to do that is to be in the best possible position, like the best version of me to be there for other people. You get on a plane, anybody who's ever flown knows they'll tell you if cabin pressure drops, secure your mask before you secure the mask of other people. I know that if I secure my mask first, then I can really be there in a deep way to help other people secure their mask. And so, what is that best version of Chad that allows me to be there to help other people make it up their hill?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm reflecting on, I don't know what the question I want to ask is, but I'm reflecting on meaning and purpose and joy, and how important those are to you. And I'm curious,
Mm.
what is the motivation or the forward movement towards those feel like? You mentioned feeling a pull to knowing that that speech that you weren't even nominated for yet was like gonna happen. So I'm curious if you could get more into the maybe somatic or internal sort of sense of how are you relating these days to your sort of purpose or personal mission? How do you feel when you're on track or off track? How do you kind of navigate with that?
There's an energy that I experience when I'm on track. We were talking before we push record. I travel a lot, and the travel can be tiring. I've done 20 events so far this year, 20 conferences. I've been in 17 cities in the last 5 weeks. The travel is not fun. Some of it can be, but most of it is not. Let's be real. But what tells me that I'm on the right path is when I get on stage, I get energy from that. I get energy from meeting people afterwards, the big lines of people who want to shake my hand and tell me that I've helped them. My energy levels rise from that. And so the work for me is incredibly energizing. The travel, maybe sometimes not so much, but I know that I'm on track when the things that I do fill up my cup. They bring me energy, they bring me joy and fulfillment and reward. And most of my days are filled with that. And the longer I'm around, the more I realize I have to do a whole lot more of the things that bring me energy and bring me joy, and a lot less of the things that don't. And I'm slowly gravitating to that place. But I know that at first that that didn't exist. Like when I was being pulled to look for someone to help me learn how to give a talk. It wasn't energy. That was just, I don't even know how to describe it. It wasn't somatic. It was a sense. I just had this, something was pulling me. And I just knew it was what I was supposed to do. I don't know how to put it into words as to how I knew. I just had a feeling. It wasn't a somatic feeling. It was deeper than the body. And it pulled me in that direction. And my wife looked at me like, let me get this straight. You want to fly to Houston, you want to spend thousands of dollars to go write a 12-minute talk for something you've never been nominated to give. There's no plan. Like I had, and I'm a planful person. I'm a very type A, right? What's the return on investment? That's kind of how my brain is wired. I'm a finance guy, and that's a lot about how I work. But this was totally the opposite. It was just like, honey, I don't know how to explain this to you. I just know that I'm supposed to go do it. And that's about all the answers that I have. I'm just supposed to go do it. And kudos to her for being supportive of it and said, if that's what you think you're supposed to go do, then you go do it. And here I am now, 9 years removed, 8 years removed, and that's what I do on a full-time basis. Who would have known that now this has become a really big business for me and the family, and I've hired, people to help me with it, hired my wife into the business, and now it's become this business to where I go around all over the world helping other people become the best versions of themselves just because I chose to listen to that voice inside of me that was whispering and pulling and saying, this is the way you're supposed to go. I'm getting kind of cold chills thinking about it now, but it's I think we all have those voices inside of us that are lighting the path in front of us, and sometimes we just have to slow down enough to be able to hear them and hopefully listen to them.
Mm. Have you noticed that voice indicating any other sort of intuitive directions for you to go? Has that been a voice that's been with you in other moments of your life?
Not like that.
Okay.
No, I mean, maybe I've had intuition in certain instances, but the volume on this, I mean, this was at 120 decibels, right? It
Wow.
was, there was no ignoring it. It was so loud, like
Yeah.
you have to go do this. And so I did. And maybe it'll come back and hopefully it does and continues to light the path ahead. But that was certainly, I've had nudges in certain directions, but that one it was undeniable. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious too about some more of those little incremental 1% change a week type inputs that you bring into your life, both for your own sort of like personal development and also for, your professional ability to be able to continue to improve in how you help others. What would you say are some of your top inputs, I guess, that lead to those compounding 1% incremental changes over time?
Well, I think a lot of it is this gets into pillar number 4, ironically, of my resilience framework. It's being comfortable with discomfort. Get comfortable with discomfort. And so I do that regularly through Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but it's conditioning yourself to lean into the uncomfortable things, to explore, and to risk failure. Because failure is not some endpoint. It's actually just a learning point. A lot of people, I believe, are scared of failure because maybe what it says about them or says about their ability or whatever. And I believe that if you're not failing, then you're not aiming high enough. You have to fail. You have to learn. You have to explore. And so for me, a big part of my practices regularly is getting comfortable with discomfort. And I talked earlier about the uncomfortableness of going blind and then getting a dog and the social discomfort I experienced and then eventually I'm traveling all over the world. I flew to by myself, just me and my dog to China or Shanghai or somewhere in Europe and I still get up at 5 a.m. to go to the gym to get a workout and I can't see the equipment. I have to feel my way around the room and find the piece of equipment that I want to use and or maybe I'm in Dubai. I went skydiving in Dubai and I'm getting a roll in jiu-jitsu with some of the people over at Alliance Dubai or any of these things. the more you get comfortable with discomfort, the more your comfort zone expands. And that's because you're expanding. And so it's creating the conditions to where you look for uncomfortable things because you know that when you do that, you'll be growing. It's the only way that you're growing. Because if you're never getting outside of your comfort zone, then you're not growing. And for me, that's where life begins, is outside my comfort zone. And maybe it's because my life has been so uncomfortable from the beginning. I feel like my life has been an experiment of living outside of my comfort zone. And so now I do things that may be viewed as a little bit extreme, whether it's a blind guy competing in a Brazilian jiu-jitsu combat sports tournament or skiing down a double black diamond without being able to see. You don't have to go that extreme. I certainly didn't start that extreme. But over time, as I edged outside my comfort zone, the edges kept expanding and they kept expanding to the point to where I'm doing what I'm doing today. So those 1% improvements in your life, are you creating the habits in your life that make you comfortable with the uncomfortable, that allow you to continue to expand, experiment, take some chances, and find that growth outside of your comfort zone and find new and creative ways to reinvent yourself? Because that really is where we learn where our boundaries are, where our limits are, is by continuing to edge just slightly outside of those boundaries.
Well, thanks, Chad. I really appreciate you coming and sharing not only your own personal story with us, but also lots of really actionable, wise sort of tips for how people can begin to look at how to put this into their own life. It's been really a pleasure having you. And I'm curious,
Pleasure.
as we're starting to wrap up, what's something that you would want to leave listeners with? Maybe something to reflect on, something they can do as this episode ends, on their own to apply to their own journey, wherever they are in their own healing process.
I think the single most important lesson that you can learn is how to get a handle on the stories that you tell yourself, particularly those about yourself and your unchangeable circumstances. And make sure that you're creating stories around those circumstances and your situation that instead of keeping you trapped in a victim mindset, they empower you with energy, confidence, and determination to ignite your full potential. Because we all become our stories. You will become your stories. We all do. And if you don't get that part right, all the other things we talked about today really get diluted. And so it's about creating the right mental model as the foundation for how you attach yourself to the circumstances that show up in your life.